Hi, this is Lynn Langett, and this is the How Do I BI screencast series on working with SQL Server Analysis Services 2008. I'm a developer evangelist with Microsoft. My blog is blogs.msdn.com, SoCalDevGal. This screencast series is a companion to my book, Smart Business Intelligence Solutions with Microsoft SQL Server 2008. In this installment, I'm going to talk about installing the sample SQL Server Analysis Services database that is available for you to work with SSAS. Before we get started, we'll take a look at the FAQ and gotchas. The first and most important point is that when you install analysis services, there is no sample database that is installed. So in order to have something to look at, unless you want to create from scratch, you're going to want to download, install, and make available all the samples. The samples are edition, machine, and version specific, and we'll be taking a look at that in the screencast. This is coming up in just a couple minutes. As far as the gotchas, the most common things that people miss is there are two parts to installing the samples. You need source data, which is relational in a particular format called a star schema. So we'll take a look at that database. And then you need metadata, which is XMLA, that's in the format of a Visual Studio solution that you work with in the Business Intelligence Development Studio. Once you download and have those files available on your machine, you're going to need to verify the connection string between bids to the source data in SSMS. That's the most common reason that the samples won't properly install. Most people will also want to build, process, and deploy the samples using bids so they can work with a live instance when they're looking at the samples for cubes and data mining models rather than working in a disconnected fashion. As in every installment of this series, I'm highlighting a community expert so that you can expand your network around SQL Server and BI. This week's expert is Denny Cherry. He's a new MVP based in Southern California, and he's an expert in SQL scalability. Now with that, let's get started with the screencast. To get started installing the samples for SQL Server Analysis Services, you're going to want to navigate out to the CodePlex website. This is Microsoft's open source community where we store samples and we allow community members to upload applications and other samples that they might have developed. In this case, these samples were actually created by Microsoft, and we put them here so that we can update them when need be. The first thing that you're going to want to do is navigate to the page MSFTDB prod samples, and there you're going to find the sample databases that you're going to need to support your cubes and data mining models. I'm assuming for this series that you'll be working with SQL Server 2008, so I'm going to click on that link, and that's going to take us over to a series of samples that we can download. You'll note that these are machine specific, and you can get them in an MSI file or a zip file. You'll note also that we do make refreshes to these samples when we issue service packs or refreshes to the core product. So when you're installing the samples, you'll want to check back on CodePlex to make sure that you're getting the appropriate samples. The samples come in two parts. There is the underlying relational database along with XMLA metadata. Once you've downloaded the MSI, then in the directory, and I'll show the complete path here, Program Files, Microsoft SQL Server 10, Tools, Samples, AdventureWorks 2008 Analysis Services Project, in this case Enterprise because we're working in the Enterprise Edition, you'll see a number of files that start with a Visual Studio Solution file and include a DW proj file, and then subsequent many XMLA files that express the metadata for the cubes and data mining models that are the samples. We'll come back to opening this and working with this in the Business Intelligence Development Studio in just a minute. Before we do this, however, we need to have source data. And this sample expects that the source data will be in the format of a star schema. We don't have time in this webcast to go over all the details of a star schema, but you'll notice if I open the appropriate sample database, which I also downloaded from CodePlex called AdventureWorks DW 2008, that the table names have a particular naming convention, and this is one critical aspect of a star schema. you'll notice that the table names start with DIM for dimension or fact for fact table. The samples that we're going to be working with require this particular database. This must be installed and you must be able to connect to it. It doesn't have to be on the same physical machine, but when you're doing testing, it is common to install both the relational engine and the multidimensional analysis services on the same machine so that the connection is quick and easy. So once you've verified that you have this database to work with in SQL Server Management Studio, then you can simply double-click the solution file over from the samples, and that will open this solution in the Business Intelligence Development Studio. Or you can use the open menu inside of Business Intelligence Development Studio. Now in my particular case, I've already built and deployed this solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the built and deployed solution rather than just opening it. So I'm going to connect to an existing database using a dot to designate the local host, and that's going to connect to an AdventureWorks DW Analysis Services database. Now an Analysis Services database is not the same in any way as a relational database. You can really think of it as a container for multidimensional objects and data mining models, such as cubes and data mining structures. And I'm going to click OK. And now inside of BIDS, you'll see that it's connecting to the Analysis Services database and reading out the information from the server. There are two methods for working with Analysis Services objects inside of BIDS. One is live or connected, and that's the mode that we're working in here. You can only work in that mode after you've at least one time opened the initial solution files, built and deployed those solution files to the analysis server. Or you can work disconnected, and I'll show you how to work disconnected in just a second. Another indicator that you're working disconnected is if you look up in the title bar, you'll see the name of the instance to which you're connected. Now inside of BIDS, we have several folders that indicate the different objects that we saw in the samples. We have data sources, which are essentially connection string information, data source views, which we'll talk about in a subsequent webcast, cubes, dimensions, mining structures, and so on. One of the things that you're going to want to do when you're setting up the samples is verify the connection string that ships as part of the sample. And in order to do that, simply double-click the default object and then click on Edit. And this will open up the familiar dialog box where you'll see that the default connection is to localhost to AdventureWorks DW, and then click Test Connection, and your test connection should succeed. You may need to reconfigure this connection, specifically the server name and possibly the authentication information depending on how your development environment is set up. The next step that you would want to do initially is you would want to right-click, you would want to process, and there will be two additional steps that you'd need to do to make these files available to the server. That would be build and deploy. And what this does is it validates the XMLA metadata and then makes these files available to the analysis server so that when you or other end users are accessing the OLAP cubes and data mining structures, that data is being read out from the source through the cube and displayed in whatever client application that you're working with. In subsequent webcasts, we're going to take a look at each and every one of the objects in the sample as a first step, and subsequently we'll look at how to create these objects using the Business Intelligence Development Studio environment. Thank you.